All right, folks, thank you very much for being here on time. We do want to get started at 6 o'clock, which is in 2 minutes. So please feel free to fill your plates and take a seat. I would encourage you to pick a seat where you can clearly see this front screen because there's quite a lot of slides in a PowerPoint this evening for the next hour. So please make yourselves comfortable, and we'll get going in just a minute. And those of you who are working on the stations, if you could encourage those community members to take a seat, that would be very helpful. All right, well, thank you very much. My name is Eileen Goodwin, and I am part of the consultant team. And my job this evening, as you probably already figured out, is to be the MC or meeting facilitator. And really, it's more of an MC, or I like to call it the air traffic controller role. And I'm all about the on-time departure. So thank you for being in your seats. Should we lose cabin pressure? No, just kidding. We do have a pretty packed agenda. And so part of my responsibility is to make sure that we get the information out, and that we also build in plenty of time to answer questions from you, and also interaction time where you can interact directly with our experts. And the experts have name badges on. And we have two kinds of name badges tonight. We have the blue badges, which are part of the technical team, and then we have folks who are here who are community advisory panel members. I'm going to ask them to come forward in just a moment. And they have red badges. So if you're a community CAP member and you have not picked up your red badge, they're on the front table. So please go badge yourself so when I bring you up, everyone can see you with your badge on. All right, I think we're getting a couple more people coming in. There is a sign-in sheet. Hopefully people will take advantage of that. If you would sign in, we would greatly appreciate it. And also, please help yourselves to snacks and take a seat so we can get started with this evening. All right, so first and foremost, I'm going to introduce the Deputy City Manager, Rob DeGoose, and he is our client, the City Project Manager, and he's going to welcome you formally and say a few words, and then I'll begin the meeting. Rob.
Hello, everyone. Rob DeGoose, again with the City of Palo Alto. I do want to welcome you all here, coming out on an evening to be with us, and I want to tell you how important it is. This is obviously a really important project to the entire community to figure out how we're going to grade separate 4 crossings in town. There's a lot at stake in terms of the construction that's going to have to take place, in terms of the money it's going to take to actually do it, and most importantly, the type of grade separation that the community agrees is the best for Palo Alto. That's what we're trying to figure out. And we're really fortunate to have AECOM, the consultant team that we have working on this. They've done this type of work all over the country and all over the peninsula, and help communities figure out what is in their best interest for grade separation. And I just want to appreciate them very much. And Eileen's our facilitator, has done a lot of this work. The project manager, technical project manager, who you'll hear from predominantly tonight, is Eddie Mercurio, right here. And she's terrific. Of course, tonight we're going to focus mostly on the 2 southern crossings, East Meadow and Charleston. So I think this night's going to be very informative for you and informative for us as we hear your feedback and your insights and your questions. that helps us as we lead towards a final recommendation to the council, ultimately has to create or decide on a preferred solution. So we have a good night for you. I'm going to hand it back to Eileen.
Thank you very much, Rob, and to the city staff. You've been great partners. So as you can see, we have an agenda, a formal agenda for you, and I wanted to also say all these materials are will be posted on the website, and that website address is on your fact sheet, which if you haven't done so, please pick one up at the sign-in table. And so you can always go if you want to see the materials, both the boards as well as the PowerPoint will be uploaded on the website. So after I finish a little bit of review of some of our housekeeping items, Etty will be going over some project background and purpose, and then as Rob said, she'll go over the Charleston and Meadow ideas. Hopefully people realized by getting the meeting notice and hearing through your network that we are focused on the south part of the community tonight. We will be having a meeting on January 23rd right here, same time, and we'll be focusing on the north end of the community at that time. So there's information for everybody at both meetings, but we are mostly focused on Charleston and Meadow, although when you get to the station breakout, we'll have a station here that can talk about other parts of the city, and the city staff and Etty will be at that station. Then we'll have a time to do some Q&A, and that's sort of our general audience question and answer. And after about 20 minutes or so, what we'll be doing is breaking out into various stations. And I'd love to have a show of hands. How many of you were joining us last summer when we had our first meeting with this team? Okay, great. So I'm going to say that's 75, 80%. So it's the same format. As you recall, you gave us some feedback through a survey and also a phone survey. You liked the format very much, and so this is the same format. Presentation, Q&A, then interaction with the team at the stations, and then at about 7:45, I will reconvene us all, ask each of our station leads to report out what the themes were at their stations, and we'll adjourn at 8 o'clock. I'll be going into some detail about the stations a little bit later when we're closer to that part of the meeting. Next. So tonight's meeting is to inform the public about the project and the work that we've done since we last were together. Identifying existing features and constraints, that's really Etty's job. You're going to hear from Paul Penninger. He is part of the AECOM team, and he will be going through some financial information that's specifically related to Palo Alto. Because one of the things we heard very much from the last meeting was people are interested in how much are these great separation ideas potentially going to cost, and then also how are we going to pay for those. So you'll see that information start to get out tonight, as well as existing features and constraints. And one of the other themes we heard very much at the first meeting was people had a big hunger for information about how something might get built. So hopefully you'll be excited to see our videos tonight, because Etty has videos that relate to how something could be constructed, all these different ideas. And so we have that information to share, and then the videos will be running on continuous loops over by the station. So you can see it again and again and understand kind of some of the construction methodology on how that will work. We're here to answer some questions, and obviously we're here to get your input. So we also will be having a matrix as part of this process, and you'll see that Etty will go through that. It's our attempt to try and use the criteria that the council has set up and has been used so far to be screening project alternatives and ideas, and how the current ideas that are currently on the table might be arrayed against some against the project alternatives. And so you're going to see somewhat of a consumer reports, although it's not the moons. We've used shades, so you'll have an opportunity to look at that. And actually, we'll have a handout in a station where you can give us feedback on whether or not we've ranked these appropriately. And we're very much interested in having you give us feedback on that tonight. So that's kind of our interactive survey, if you will, for this evening. Next. Okay, so as you can see, we are very busy on our train track, and we had our first meeting, the Blue Calm, right there in August. Now here we are in November, where we have not only community meetings, but technical advisory meetings. Our community group meets, the rail committee has met. So this is where we are today. And then our next community meeting, as I said, that blue box is in January, with hopefully a preferred solution in early 2019. So it's the same schedule you've been seeing, and so far we're holding to our schedule. Next. Alrighty, so I've sort of already talked about this, but just to do it one more time. We started in August and we really reviewed some materials that have been done, and now we're on to feedback on the Charleston Meadow ideas, the 3D photo visuals, and to begin the funding conversation. In January, we'll be talking about Palo Alto Avenue, Churchill, and the citywide tunnel. We'll also have similar 3D visuals and animations, similar to the ones you'll see tonight, only for those ideas. And then we'll continue the funding conversation because we know the funding conversation is a really big one. So we'll be putting a lot of information into the world tonight, and we'll pick it up where we left off in January. And we'll talk about some next steps and give you an idea of when and how some of the decisions will get made in the spring of 2019. Okay, so I think I'm about ready to turn it over to Etty. But I do want to do two things. One is I want to ask our CAP members to come forward. And I'm also, come on down, David. Come on, Tony. All right, look at this august group. They have been fantastic. And I'm going to ask them just to be next to each other. Quickly go down who you are, Phil, and who do you represent, and then we'll have Chris do it, and we'll just pass the microphone. Yep, just say who you are and which neighborhood, and go ahead and pass it along.
Phil Burton, excuse me, officially St. Clair Gardens, but really south of Midtown.
Chris Logan, South Palo Alto.
Hi, Nadia Nayak, Old Palo Alto.
Tony Carrasco, South Palo Alto.
Dave Shen, Old Palo Alto.
Thank you. So these folks not only have given an evening of their month, evening of their lives every month so far, but they're also giving extra time to be at our community meetings. And when we break at stations, they're available to help you get to the right station and also answer some of those questions themselves. So you recognize them because they have the red name tag. So thank you very much, and thank you for your service. It's very important, and they're listening carefully, and we'll be having a meeting where they debrief us and give us advice, so we really appreciate that. Before I turn it to Etty, and I promise, one of the other things I would like to accomplish is to find out how we got all of you in the room this evening. And I said last time, and I'll repeat my joke, in case you don't remember, I'm from Chicago, so you get to vote more than once. And so I know we tried to get it out a whole bunch of different ways. Obviously, it's working. So it's really helpful for the team to find out how you got here. So I'm going to say about 80% of you were at our first meeting in August. How many of you would say you had attended a meeting that wasn't this project team, but it was still about this same topic before 2018? Okay, so a little bit fewer, maybe 60%. Okay. How about somebody, I'm here because I did see that postcard that you sent to me, the physical mail, like the old kind. Okay. Oh, wow. All right. What do you guys think? 50? 40? Okay, thank you. Okay, 39.8, but I'm rounding. Next door? All right. Oh, okay. That's about 20. E-Blast, where the flyer maybe from one of our CAP members? Oh, excellent. So almost similar to the next door. All right, word of mouth. You're just here because somebody told you to be here. Oh, excellent. That's such a great network. That doesn't, sometimes I get nothing there. Okay, sign up list. Somebody, you signed up before and you actually got an email from the city because you already signed up to find out all things rail. Now, most of you should have that. Okay, great. All right. Social media, by that, Facebook, Twitter, anything? Okay, let it show. It's a little bit younger demographic. The mayor's newsletter. I understand the mayor put some sort of ping out there. Okay, a couple people on that one. So thank you very much. Really appreciate you being here. Was there anything else? Yes, one more thing. Palo Alto Online. How many saw that? I didn't even know it was on there, so fantastic. Okay, thank you for letting us know. That's very, very helpful. So about a third of you definitely saw that. So that's something for us to track. All right, anything else that I didn't capture that I should have here? Neighborhood. And which neighborhood? Neighborhood, anybody, neighborhood email list. about 25. Maybe 20, 25? I think that was a little bit later. Okay, so thank you very much. I'm turning it over to Etty. She will go through PowerPoint. She'll be showing you some videos. We'll probably turn down the lights a little bit. And then we'll also have Paul's PowerPoint that's talking about funding. And then Rob will do our very last slide. And then we'll come up and do some Q&A. It would very much help us go quicker if we could just get through all of this. And then we'll come back and we can always move back to the slide that that you saw, and they are numbered. So please take notes, and we'll do as we did before. It's our goal to get as many of those questions answered during the Q&A, and then we'll break for the stations, and then we'll reconvene and get you out of here at 8. Etty.
Great. Well, thank you all. I'm mic'd. Thank you all for being here tonight. I appreciate the time you're spending here. And I just kind of want to, there's a lot of stuff to go over tonight, very complex, and I want to encourage everybody to go to the stations where you can get answers one-on-one and really see these exhibits up close themselves. But I just kind of want to take a little step back here is what is an at-grade crossing? So an at-grade crossing is where we have the rail, vehicles, pedestrian, bicycles, and they're all on the same level. And when the train comes by, the gates go down, and pedestrians, bicycles, peds, they all have to wait until the train passes and then the gates come up. This causes congestion delays, it causes circulation issues, and also there's safety issues with the at-grade crossings. Within the city of Palo Alto, there are 4 at-grade crossings: Palo Alto, Churchill, Meadow, Charleston, and as Eileen mentioned, we're really focusing tonight on the Meadow, Charleston area. Just kind of to hit home, people behaving badly. This is actually Ravenswood and Menlo Park. The light on El Camino has turned red. This white car that you see is now stopped on the tracks. If the train comes now, this would be a very disastrous, we could have a bodily injury or potentially, a fatality here. So this is really why we're looking at these, removing this conflict between between vehicles, pedestrians, and bicycles with the train traffic. So how do we do that? So this is really why the city is undertaking this effort, is, when we separate, this at-grade crossing, is we really look at improving the traffic circulation, the mobility, and really increasing the public safety for the vehicles, bicycles, and pedestrians. So how do we do that? Well, we do it what is called a grade separation. And we're going to talk about 3 of these today, but the hybrid is basically you take the railroad up and you partially lower the roadway, or vice versa, you could take the roadway up and partially lower the railroad. That's what we call a hybrid. A trench is where we put the railroad completely below the ground and leave the roadway at its current elevation where it is today. And a viaduct is kind of the flop of that, whereas we leave the roadway where it is today and take the railroad completely up. And a tunnel is where we really put the railroad deep underground in a tunnel, but we're not going to be talking about that alternative today. So again, why are we doing this? We know Caltrain has currently about 92 trains per day that run on this corridor, and we know that based on their projections, they're going to have increased number of trains. So the delays and congestion that you see today are going to get worse as you see train traffic increase. And so we're really looking at how to alleviate the circulation congestion issues as well as improve safety at these at-grade crossings. So we're going to cover 3 ideas, and I'm just kind of outline here. I'm going to cover the trench first, the hybrid second, and the viaduct third. And I'm going to start with the aerial and then kind of go through cross sections like you cut the cake and see where the filling is. And then I'll go to the 3D animations and then finally show you kind of some examples out there, that have been constructed elsewhere. So how did we first we have to kind of have a basis of kind of evaluating these alternatives. And so we are basing the designs of these alternatives based on published design criteria and regulations. And Caltrain has published design criteria where the railroad profile, which is how the railroad goes up or the railroad goes down, can't have greater than a 1%. Vertical clearance, which is the distance between a top of rail or a structure, is for the trains, we need 24.5 feet, and for vehicles, we need 15.5 feet. And I'll point out within these alternatives where we have design exceptions that need to be approved by Caltrain for these alternatives. So the first alternative I'm going to go through is the trench. This is an aerial, and again, I encourage you to go to the stations because you'll be able to see much clearer, where this is. To the left of the screen is the north end to San Francisco. The Alma Street is running directly across. To the south, on the right-hand side, is San Jose. And we also have the features of Matadero Creek, Barron Creek, Adobe Creek. And the Caltrain track runs parallel to Alma Street on the west side of Alma, and we're looking at Meadow Drive and Charleston, those at-grade crossings. So the first thing, and I'm just going to kind of walk through kind of a high-level construction sequencing, and again, the 3D animation will kind of hopefully give you a visual on this, is that with the trench, we have to figure out how we deal with the drainage, the crossflow from Barron Creek and Adobe. And so we need to construct either a lift station or some kind of creek diversion, and that's part of our engineering process that we're still evaluating. Once we've done that creek diversion, we still have major utility relocations that are located within all, the Caltrain corridor, as well as Meadow and Charleston, so those need to be relocated. Once we do that, we can build the shoe fly, and the shoe fly is the temporary track. So Caltrain is a commuter rail service, and so we have to keep the commuter rail service in operation. And in order for us to build our project, we have to basically create a railroad detour, temporary shoe fly tracks, or the railroad term is shoe fly, so if I use that term, I'm really saying it's the temporary tracks. So the temporary tracks that we have to build are about 8,400 feet long, starting about Loma Verde, all the way down to Fern Avenue. Once we've built the shoe fly tracks, we can move Caltrain operations to those tracks, and then that clears the construction area so that we can then build our pump station, because we do have to pump and keep the trench dry, as well as do our excavation for the trench. The trench depth will range from 0 to 37 feet, and at Meadow and Charleston, it's about 30 feet deep. And the total length of trench is about 6,300 feet. So I'm just going to quickly walk you through, this is kind of the cutting of the cake. So we're looking north. On the left-hand side is you have the houses, the backyards backing up to the Caltrain right-of-way. This is a kind of a caricature of the existing condition with the tracks running north-south next to the thing. So the first thing we have to build is the shoe fly track, which will build between the existing tracks and Alma Street. Once you build the shoe fly, then you can go ahead and it's very instantaneous when you do construction via PowerPoint. You can build your trench structure. We're still looking at the engineering, but when you have these walls that are this deep, we have to have some kind of lateral support system, which we call the ground anchor. And it's these rods that you see here that are kind of going back at an angle. And where you have these rods, they're structural elements, and so you're going to be limited on what kind of landscaping or what kind of structures can be placed above those ground anchors, because they are structural elements and cannot be, you do not want to, adversely impact their structural integrity. So, once you have the trench built, you can move your train operations down into the trench, and then you can remove the shoe fly. So this is the 3D animation, kind of taking those 2D photos, engineering drawings here. So the first thing we do is we build the shoe fly track. The pink is the proposed trench that we construct. As again, we need to build those drainage facilities, and as here we're going to move, kind of go down to a bird's eye view, kind of moving north to south, starting at Loma Verde. The first thing we need to do is remove the vegetation in order to build the shoe fly. We come in and build the temporary fence, and then we come in and build the temporary the railroad tracks along with the temporary poles. This allows us to begin our trench track construction. And as we, excuse me, start moving south, as we get to a barren creek, we're going to have to build some kind of diversion or structure. This scenario here is showing a temporary lift station, potentially in Alma Street, and then once you move the shoe fly, remove it, then you could maybe move that lift station, but this is still an engineering evaluation and process. About this location is where the ground anchors would start to begin, and so as we're looking at the length of ground anchors, there's a potential to have subsurface right-of-way acquisition that could extend into the backyards. But again, we're evaluating that further. When we get to Meadow, we will have to, the right turn lane, because of the shoe fly, is actually taken out of service because of the shoe fly. But we also will need to close Meadow Drive as we build the roadway at Meadow. Once we've completed that, we can continue the trench, and I'm just, all of a sudden, I froze. Oh, there we go. And similarly at Charleston, you would close Charleston while you build the roadway bridge, and then continue completing your trench. And again, similar like Barron Creek, we would have to figure out how to do the creek diversion with either a lift station or some type of engineering solution that would manage to convey the flows without exacerbating any flooding issues. And then finally, you could restore back the right turn lanes and do some limited kind of landscaping, but keep in mind that we have those ground anchors potentially below surface that limit what we can and can't do. So these are two trench grade separations that were constructed. The one on the left-hand side is Alameda down in the LA area. It's in San Gabriel. This is actually a freight railroad trench. And the one on the right is also down in Southern California in Compton, where it's another freight trench where they have two tracks in the trench and then a surface freight adjacent the two tracks. So again, this is where we want your input back. This is a kind of an initial list on pros and cons. For the trench, we know the pro is it really has the least visual impact because you've got the trains below grade and you have a reduced rail noise issue. However, the cons, as I mentioned, is we still have to deal with adobe and barren and how we can mitigate potential flooding issues and look at if there's any right-of-way impacts that are as a result of trying to create those creek diversions. We have major utility relocations. The potential for the ground anchors for those supports for the trench could have subsurface right-of-way acquisitions. We do need to put a high fence in to protect those areas where we have the high voltage lines. And this has probably the highest long-term maintenance costs of the three alternatives we're looking at tonight. It does require design exception from Caltrain because this alternative only works if we can get a 2% grade on the railroad. And it does have closures of Meadow and Charleston during the construction of the roadway bridges. And this one does have the longest construction time of the three alternatives that we're looking at. So moving to the hybrid, this is where we're going to partially raise the railroad and partially lower the roadway. Same aerial that I just showed for the trench with left-hand side is the north end towards San Francisco, right-hand side is the south end towards San Jose. When we do the hybrid, because we're raising the railroad above the creeks, we have minimal impacts to the creek. We still have the Caltrain, but in order to do the hybrid, at the two grade separations, the first thing we need to do is build that temporary track to the east so that we can clear the area. Once we build that shoe fly, we can move the operations to the new shoe fly, and that allows us to build the embankment and the the railroad bridges for the railroad. Just a quick summary, this is kind of the existing condition today. First thing we need to do is build the shoe fly. The second thing is once you've built the shoe fly, you move operations. Once you've moved operations, then we can start the construction of the embankment. Once the embankment is complete, you move the operations back to the railroad tracks. And at this point, we can start doing the lowering of the roadway, and you'll see this a little bit more in the 3D animation. And once that's complete, we can remove the shoe fly. This is the 3D animation. You'll see this is the same aerial, existing Caltrains tracks. The first thing we're going to do here is we're actually going to only build a portion of the shoe fly because we're trying to limit the impacts to Alma. This allows us to start the bridge construction, start the embankment for the railroad, and then once we have the railroad, then we'll finish off with a railroad structure. And this does require a temporary design exception. Once we finish Charleston, we move on and we do kind of the same procedure of preparing the railroad abutments and piers, build the embankment, construct the railroad bridge, and at this point, you can now move the railroad to its newly permanent embankment, and then now we have the ability to then now lower the roadway at Meadow, and then subsequently lower the roadway at Charleston. So we're going to kind of zoom in. We're going to start at, Meadow, where we're going to build a portion of the shoe fly. We need to remove the vegetation, come back, put in the construction temporary fence. Once we've done that, we can start the shoe fly construction and move the trains to the new temporary railroad. At Charleston, we would try and maintain, we have some underground utilities to relocate because we're lowering Charleston as well as Alma, so those have to get relocated. We would prepare the roadway abutments and piers, build those for the railroad bridge, build the embankments up to those features, and then build the railroad bridge. To note here is we have a temporary 12-foot clearance, which is a temporary design exception, but it allows Charleston Road to remain open. Then moving south, once we finish with Charleston, we would then extend the shoe fly or the temporary railroad tracks. That would allow us then to come in and build the abutments and the center pier for the railroad structure. Then we can complete the railroad embankment and then complete the railroad bridge. Again, noting that we would have a 12-foot temporary vertical clearance during this time. Now we have a completed railroad embankment, and at this point we can move the Caltrain operations from the shoe fly up to its permanent track alignment, and now Caltrain is operating on the raised embankment. Once that is complete, now we work on lowering the roadway, and this is a very complex construction staging, where we would basically construct Meadow and Alma by halves, and so you would only have one lane in each direction on Alma, and the same for Meadow as you construct half. Once you construct half of it, then you can move the traffic to the newly lowered portion of the railroad. And then once that's done, then we can continue with lowering the rest of the roadway for an ultimate signalized intersection similar to what you have today. We did not repeat that same staging plan, but the same staging plan, once Meadow is done, you would then apply that same kind of half by half at Charleston and ultimately have a lowered roadway with a signalized intersection with the proper vertical clearances as required by design criteria. And then finally, this is just a street view looking from across the way at Charleston. And these are examples of hybrid grade separation. It's the most common type of grade separation you'll find along the Caltrain corridor. Holly Street in San Carlos is an example, Ralston Avenue in Belmont, 42nd Avenue in San Mateo, as well as San Bruno. There's a lot more examples than just these three, but there's quite a few examples of hybrid construction within the Caltrain corridor. So some of the pros and cons, just high level. This does not block creeks. It has minimal impact to the creek. You can restore landscape and we don't have any issues with subsurface structural elements. We have a shorter shoe fly than the trench. It has lower long-term maintenance and no Caltrain railroad design exceptions are required for the permanent facility, but as I mentioned, the temporary 12-foot clearance is a design exception required. Some of the cons is it really has a construction staging that, trying to keep traffic moving along Alma that could severely impact closures on Alma, Meadow, and Charleston. So we could have some major congestion issues during construction. It does have the visual impact because we are raising the railroad. We do have major utility relocations for Alma, Meadow, and Charleston. And we do have some minor right-of-way impacts at the driveways of some of the properties. But those are just driveway relocations, but really not very many right-of-way impacts. So last alternative, and thank you guys for being so patient here, is the viaduct. Again, this is the aerial that you've seen for the first two alternatives. San Francisco north on the left, San Jose on the right. We have the creeks and the Caltrain tracks. With the viaduct, we do not have to build a shoe fly. So we can actually construct the viaduct pretty much in the location where we showed the shoe fly for the other two alternatives. What this means is that our rail height, our viaduct height goes about 0 to 20 feet, starting at Loma Verde, getting up to the maximum height at Meadow, staying high, and then descending at Charleston. And this has no impacts to the creeks. And let me just kind of go through the cross sections. This is where we are today, the same one I've showed for the other two. The next step is you build the viaduct while Caltrain continues to operate on their current alignment, which means we don't have to do any grade crossing changes or modifications. And just FYI, this is just a structure that was just pulled, as a visual. But the viaduct is then built to the east of the current Caltrain locations, but between Caltrain and Alma. And once it's constructed, then we would move the trains to the new viaduct structure, and these trains were actually going to be farther away now from the backyards of those property owners. This is the 3D animation for that. We start again with the aerial, existing Caltrain track. The purple is we're going straight into constructing the viaduct. And here we're coming down into the visual where we would have to remove the vegetation in order to clear for construction, build a temporary fence. Caltrain is operating on their existing alignment, and we can start the viaduct construction going up and over the creeks. Yep. Okay, I got a little stuck here. Oh, there we go. We're going to go up and over Meadow so we can keep Meadow Drive for the most part open. We may have some nighttime closures in order to set girders for the bridges. We have minimal utility relocations. There are some overhead lines that we would look at undergrounding. And once the viaduct is complete, then we can move to Caltrain operations. We do cutovers, so this happens for all the alternatives. As basically we take the Caltrain operations and we move them up to the viaduct. And once you've finished the viaduct, you have an opportunity for doing something with that real estate that's now open. And this is kind of a view, street level from the east side of Alma. And just kind of moving down the alignment to show you Charleston as well. And viaduct examples, this is a BART on the East Bay in El Cerrito, where they have created an Ohlone Greenway underneath BART. And in Concord, they just put some landscaping underneath the structure itself. So pros and cons of the viaduct: it has, going down the pros, it has minimal impacts to roadways during construction. No temporary roadway is needed. Landscaping can be restored. Does not impact the creeks, and it has a low long-term maintenance cost, and really has very minor utility relocations. The cons are, it does require a design exception for Caltrain, because in order to make this work, we do need a 1.4% grade, which is over the 1%, and it does have the visual impact from the raised railroad. I do? Oh, thank you. Does not, sorry, thank you. I spell checked it, but it didn't correct. So back in 2017, the City Council adopted some evaluation criteria that they've been using to screen options and ideas to date. And so taking this criteria that was adopted in 2017, we've put it into a matrix, and that's what Eileen had referred to. And we have a station over here that we would like to get your your input on, the matrix itself. So this is the matrix that we have taken. So the city criteria is in the column on the left-hand side. The three alternatives, and we're trying to look comparatively between the alternatives, between the trench, hybrid, and viaduct. And then, we've done some initial construction costs. Right now, the order of magnitude of cost for the trench is the most expensive, with the hybrid actually the least expensive, and the viaduct kind of falling in between. And the construction duration is the trench is the most complicated, so it's going to take the most amount of time. It has lots of utility relocations. The hybrid has equally, complications as well. And the viaduct, because the primary reason we see the length of construction on that as being so reduced is really because we do not have to build a shoe fly or the temporary track. So that really saves time, and we don't have major utility relocations. But again, this is our kind of first blush of where we think, these are comparatively, but we're asking for your input, and that station is going to be over here. So please come over and give us your comments on that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul to talk about financing.
Thank you, Etty. I have no special animations with me. I do have some basic information about funding and financing options, which is really just an introduction to some of the concepts that we typically talk about when we're talking about funding and financing infrastructure at a local level in California, and then some ideas about potential sources. So first of all, just a couple of definitional points. By funding, what we're really talking about are sources that don't need to be repaid or not recoverable by a lender or an investor. So they're things like grants or local taxes or fees that are collected over time or collected at a point in time from a funder that you're not repaying with interest. And so when you're putting together a kind of set of sources of capital for a given infrastructure project, you want to ideally look for as many funding opportunities as possible. Financing refers to money that needs to be repaid with interest to a lender or to an investor. And so examples of financing that you're probably all familiar with would be loans, whether they're private sector loans or bond funding. So when you're as a municipality issue a bond, say, against your general fund, that needs to be repaid back with interest. In the case of transportation infrastructure in particular, historically the federal government, and this remains true today, has provided the vast majority of funding for all types of transportation infrastructure, including things like grade separations. Over time, however, as I'm sure you're all aware, the federal role, the federal presence in funding infrastructure has diminished. And so state, regional, and local governments have had to become very creative at raising different types of funding and financing to support important projects. We've suggested a few sources here that you see on the screen, and that will be available to talk more about these in the breakout session. There are literally dozens of potential sources, all of which could be feasible if there was the right conditions and political will, but all have pros and cons and distinct challenges, so they require a lot of additional discussion and analysis. A couple of sources at the federal level that you should be all aware of include the Transportation Finance and Innovation Act, or TIFIA, program loans, which could provide up to 33% of project costs. They do require a match from the local jurisdiction. Build Transportation Discretionary Grants, which is $1.5 billion overall nationally for infrastructure improvement projects. And then at the state level, the Highway Railroad Crossing Safety Account, or HRCSA, which provides $150 million annually for grade separation projects. An example of a creative financing or attempt to address local issues regionally is Measure B, which is a tax increment program that will allocate $700 million to fund grade separation projects in Sunnyvale, Mountain View, and Palo Alto. And then locally, and I've highlighted some of these, and they're really, as I said before, literally dozens of potential local sources of funding that you could consider if there was political will and the desire on the part of the community to look at them. And these are some of the major sources that other communities have adopted around California to fund transportation infrastructure projects. So public-private partnerships, this is where if you had a developable parcel and there was some potential to partner with the developer, you could capture some of the value of that to fund a given purpose, a given infrastructure project. Melrose Community Facilities Districts, that's a local district that would require approval by affected property owners or businesses, and that would enable the assessment of a fee that could then be bonded against in the future to raise capital for a project. Property taxes, even though in California under Proposition 13, there is a limited ability to kind of move around property taxes. In Palo Alto, you do have the ability to increase property taxes should you choose with voter approval. A flat per fee employee or business license tax are other kinds of sources that have been looked at, including in, very prominently in some neighboring communities, which have recently passed per employee or head count taxes to raise funding for local projects. One thing to note about this is that if you want to designate the funding specifically for a particular purpose, like grade separation, the threshold for voter approval goes up, and you need to have a 2/3 vote. So it's not going into a general pot or around a set of projects. It's very likely for most sources that you would be looking at as the city of Palo Alto, that if you were to dedicate it just to a grade separation project or set of projects, that you would need a 2/3 vote. So I've just put together a couple of kind of hypothetical scenarios of what the probability might be of obtaining these different types of funding and financing. As I said before, they're all potentially feasible if the right circumstances come about and if there's political will locally to raise this funding. And one hypothetical scenario, if you assume a pretty optimistic amount of funding from the TIFIA loan program, plus all of the Highway Railroad Safety Account money from the state of California in a given year, plus a share of Measure B, plus an increase in property taxes, which I've already heard about, could potentially be controversial here. You could raise up to $1 billion. In this other hypothetical scenario, number 2, this is just without the Highway Railroad Safety Account funds. So there are literally hundreds of ways you could put together the capital that might be needed to fund these projects. And so what we wanted to do today was just to introduce some of the most important sources. TIFIA is a loan. It's paid back. It's a low interest loan that's paid back to the federal government, and it's somewhere. So I made this stark definition between funding and financing. It's a loan that actually acts a little bit more like funding than traditional financing. So it would still need to be paid back, yes. Yes. I think I'm going to pass it over to Rob now. Thank you.
We're almost done.
Yeah, I think this is the last slide. And for those that came in late, my name is Rob DeGos with the City of Palo Alto City Manager's Office. And as we think about financing of grade separation, which is a very critical issue, the costs of these are going to be really massive. We also have to put into context we have other interests on our capital budget. The city has obviously an obligation to keep up with our infrastructure, our streets, our parks, our open space. We also have an interest in building new things, a new police building, garages, other things. Our capital budget is a 5-year plan. I think it's somewhere in the $300 to $400 million range. And so as we think about additional funding sources for grade separation, we have to understand that some of those sources we may actually also want to use for some of these other infrastructure needs that the city has. So these are just several of them, and these are some of the higher priorities that the community and the city council has at the moment. So with that, I think that pretty much ends our presentation. We're eager to get to your questions.
Summary of ideas. I think this is me. Okay. Thank you, Robs. Don't go away because you may get a question. So the summary of ideas, just to put it back again, is you heard about the trench, you heard about the hybrid, you heard about the viaduct. So there's lots of questions you might have about that. And we're at the Q&A period. So I want to give about 20 minutes. I heard some feedback last time that you really liked those stations. And so I think we'd like to do 20 and then like 35 so that we get you out of here at 8, but you leave time for the report out. So how many of you think you want to ask questions directly that has something to do with a general idea that other people can benefit from hearing? Because if it's just about your house, it should be talking to the engineers against the wall. If you're making a statement, I would ask that let's get some of the clarifying questions out first, because you can leave a statement at the stations or come up to me during the station time. So really this is about asking clarifying questions of our experts that are of a general nature. And I'm gonna ask Millette to work the microphone for me. There she is. Okay, but one at a time. All right, I'm gonna just start here with the lady on the aisle, and then we'll go up a little bit on this side, and then we'll switch back over and start with that gentleman right there with the red coat.
I have a couple questions. I'm confused why you didn't show sound walls on the hybrid example. As I understand it, you have to have sound walls, which really make a dramatic difference in appearance. And also, I'm confused on why you have low probability on the funding sources for business license and per employee tax, both of which have been talked about in our community, and surrounding communities have passed business license tax just recently, and I think are a real likelihood of something that we might do. And also, I think story poles should be erected so residents can really see how tall these projects, viaducts and hybrid, really are in actuality. They're done for other developments in town, story poles. And also, I look forward to hearing about the passenger tunnel freight on top option, and want to very much get that back to get that on into the discussion. And
Okay.
obviously other people too, a much more affordable tunnel thing. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for being so net. There's a couple people who need to respond. Sound wall, why wasn't the sound wall included in the video? Etty?
The sound wall was included in the video. If you go to the cross sections there, you can see what we've shown there is about a 6-foot high noise barrier. Our noise expert is back there, so you can talk to him about what kind of mitigation measures, but at this point in time, we did show about a 6-foot sound wall barrier.
For hybrid, we've got them on loops here, so you might want to come up during the break and you can take a look. Yeah. For the hybrid, it's right there. Okay, so there's an opportunity to look at that on the break, so let's do that. Paul, any reason why you have a low probability on the employee tax?
It was not specific to Palo Alto.
Be mic'd.
Oh, you gotta turn yourself back
Is
on.
my-
And
is my
somebody's
mic-
wrestling. I don't know if that's you, Ati, but that's the bad part about these guys.
Sorry.
They get mic'd up. They don't know how to handle it. We're not letting them go to the restroom, that's for sure.
Because it would require voter approval. It may be based on a poll from this meeting that we need to upgrade our assessment of the probability of those sources here. In general, they're considered difficult to obtain because they require voter approval, and so that's a heavier lift than applying for a loan.
And then as far as the story polls, I think that might be something the city might look at once some sort of preferred alternative, or when you get it narrowed down, maybe there could be some of that. I know it's not really part of a typical feasibility study scope like we're in right now. Rob, did you want to add to that? The city can look into that. And then passenger tunnel, we've heard that one before. That's something that I believe the rail committee talked about. So I think that's possibly in discussion during the time maybe between now and our January meeting. So thank you for bringing that up. I also heard a lot of support for that with the clapping. The gentleman with the red jacket right there. Thank you.
Yeah, I was intrigued by the idea of recovering the land with the viaduct. And I'm wondering who would own that land. That's always been a question. If you recover real estate from the railroad right of way, who has the right to build on it?
And Eti, who owns that today? So let's start there.
So that property is actually owned by Caltrain today, and I think that'd be something that the city would need to talk to, and negotiate on that. But currently it's owned by Caltrain themselves.
But it could be something in negotiation with Caltrain.
And also, I should also mention is that property also has underlying utilities that are owned by Union Pacific Railroad. So it's a little complex real estate
So it's
negotiation.
unlikely to be developed for more houses or anything. It would probably be some sort of general use. Yes, and then we'll come to this gentleman in the front, Millette, next, and then I'm going to start working my way maybe over here on the side.
I have the mic now.
Yes, you do.
Okay. I was wondering how much contact have you had with Caltrans to get a 2% grade permission? If that doesn't go through, then the whole idea of a trench is canceled. So why spend too much time on the trench if you can't get that approved?
So Eti?
Yes. So we did meet with Caltrain, not Caltrans. That's always tried to, and we did ask them for, within their design criteria, they say 1% is their criteria. However, there's language is that they will accept up to 2% on a case-by-case basis. And we have requested from Caltrain, and we're still waiting for that, what is the procedure to get a design exception through their process? And so we've been talking to them, and we're still waiting to hear back on the procedure. And there was a letter that was actually sent from the city to Caltrain asking them on a few other issues as well.
Okay, is that helpful? Okay, this gentleman in the front, and then we'll come over here, and then I'm going to ask Millette to go way in the back to that person right there in the black with her hand in the air. You're next. Okay.
I'm Frank. I have two questions.
Sure.
One is about mitigation of noise, and I noticed that the noise level of all three options was the same, and it would seem that there would be differences. And I'm concerned about what can be done about noise and vibration. And the second thing is it appears in the graphics that Caltrain is already electrified, and I have not seen any electric locomotives on there lately.
Okay, so first thing first, I think the best thing to do with your noise question is if you turn around, there's a gentleman sitting down, his name is Paul, and he has a red tie on, and he can address all of the noise, vibration, et cetera, style questions. As far as Caltrain, they're in the process of doing what they call the CalMod program, which is electrifying Caltrain, but they haven't started to run those yet, but they will be. And so they will start that in the next, I think, at end of 19, is that when, beginning of 2020, I think, is when you'll start to see the actual electrified engines. I will say, because I do this a lot, they don't have enough to run entire service yet as far as the actual electric train cars. So they'll be running both diesel and electric until they fully electrify their fleet. So you're going to see both kinds, but it's under construction because they're doing this in different parts, and they have to go from San Francisco all the way to south of San Jose. So it's a big project, and they're working on it. Yes, you've got the question.
Hi, yeah, my name's Doug.
Hi, Doug.
2 questions, both related to the uniqueness of our corridor passing so close to housing on both sides. The first one is it possible, in addition to story polls, that we could see some honest visualizations of what these 3 solutions would look like from the bedrooms and the backyards on the park side, and also on the Alma side from all of the housing along there? I think that would be helpful. Clapping, everybody, thank you. I love applause. And number 2, I commend your deep enthusiasm for the Viaduct. It's clear that we would all walk out from this presentation only loving viaducts. But I think given the closeness of all of the housing, we really should have a more honest assessment of the benefits of the other 2 possibilities. I think I'm questioning why anybody ever anywhere in the United States built a trench, given this presentation. Like, it seems like you've presented the trench as such an obviously bad idea. I don't understand why any have ever been built, and clearly I don't understand why any hybrids have been built. So I feel like this is a little biased, and I'm hoping for January we can see a more balanced view of the pros and cons of all 3 of these possibilities. Thank you.
Okay, so there was a request for some visualization, and again, I think the videos are what is currently where we are. When you do an environmental document, typically you do some more visualizations. Etty?
Yeah, so we do the time constraints. We were only able to model up to what we've shown today, but to do the visualization from the other side, which we would like to do, again, we'll talk to the city, but it's just a question we have to model it and then present those views. So
it's a possibility. Stay tuned. Okay, the lady in the black there, and then I think we had someone here in a purple sweater, I think was right there. Millette, if you would. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I just noticed with the Viaduct option, you didn't have to build the shoe fly, and with both the trench and the hybrid model, why can't you build in that same intermediate location that you would for the Viaduct? Why do you have to do a shoe fly and build it in the same location? And I'd like to second the visualization thing. I noticed that in the pictures that you have here, the piers underneath the viaduct are almost continuous. But if you looked at the pictures you showed, for example, at Ralston Ave and Belmont, the piers underneath are pretty far spread apart, and that seems like a big difference to me.
Etty, you want to discuss why you made the aesthetic issue about the piers?
Well, let me answer the first question first, is why we can't. So we did look at the geometry for potentially building the trench in the location where the shoe fly is. And the geometry when you're going down in a trench is we have to get the trench down because of going back to the vertical clearances. That trench is 30 foot deep, and we have a constraint at the the south end, which is the San Antonio station, which is in Mountain View, and then we have constraints on the north end. So we couldn't geometrically make the same, the alignment for the railroad to work, that you could put the trench in between where we show the shoe fly. And the same thing was true for the hybrid. So it's just the length that we have through there. So, and also the width of the structures that are in there as well. So we did take a look at it, but it didn't pencil out in the initial engineering evaluation.
You want to address the piers are further apart in the still photos and the video?
Yes, we made an assumption that the piers were, like BART, it runs their piers at 70 foot on center, and so we just made that assumption. We can always pull the piers out farther. It's just a kind of a balance where when you have your columns farther apart, your depth of structure gets deeper because you're having to support that. So it's a balance, and we can pull that. And so the examples are actually have probably a deeper structure, but that's something that's a balance that you just do as you evaluate structure.
Okay.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. One is, the catenaries are pretty tall, and I looked very hard to see them, and there were some really skinny, hard to see white lines that I assumed were the supports for the catenaries, but they were not well shown. And my second question has to do with the hybrid. What happens to the houses at the corners where those huge walls get built to support the overheads? It wasn't at all clear from the visuals whether those houses remained, whether they had access from the roads, and how.
Okay, do you want to address that, or is that something for
Well,
also further deep dive at the stations?
It's further deep dive, but going back to your comment on the electrification poles, I mean, we know the height and we know the diameter of the poles, and so the modeler basically modeled those to scale. And so that's kind of in the scale, that's how they look in the 3D animation. As far as the roadway on the hybrid, the criteria that we were trying to follow for the roadway was to really minimize impacts to houses. And so we are only lowering the road about 7 feet. And I think, raise your hand where, okay, raise your hand for the roadway. We have a blow up of the limits of roadway impact, and you can go back to that board in the far back there and talk to the staff there about, and get a little bit more understanding of what that roadway impact is.
Okay, and a follow-up, and then if you would hand it down to the person with the khaki shirt and the beard who's a couple seats over from you. Oh, Millette took it back. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. I'll just repeat what you say. So would you have any say over the aesthetic design of the structure that becomes holding up the viaduct? And I think the answer would be yes, definitely. Just like there could be a meeting like this where various designs are happening and you guys could all weigh in on that. All right, I'm promising this person who's standing up and then this person here with the khaki shirt and the long beard. Right over from the lady. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Doug.
Another Doug.
Absolutely. So last month, Jerry Brown signed legislation mandating zoning to allow housing at BART stations. I'm wondering if the same logic is going to be applied to Caltrain, and whether that could change our options. You know, buildings can be made a lot more attractive to look at than a viaduct. Also, potentially, it's a source of money to do the whole development.
It sounds like it's kind of a city question to me, Rob.
Yeah, it's not a question that I can answer. I appreciate what you're saying. I know that the state's doing a lot to encourage more housing and more density around transit. So it's likely that there's something there that will allow for that on Caltrain corridor, but we'll make note of it and get back to you on that one.
Okay, yes.
I had a question regarding the financing/funding. There was a line that said a Melrose Community Facilities District. If it's true that a Melrose district is created for the benefit of the people who live within it, what benefit is going to be applied to the people within 2 blocks of the Caltrain?
Okay, good question. We'll have Paul address that. And it could be bigger than the 2 blocks, by the way. It could be the whole city, right?
I'm not sure that it could be, the Melrose district could be sized in a variety of different ways, but you would have to very carefully define what the benefit was to either the residents, the households within the district, or to the business owners or property owners. And so that would be a lot of what Etty described earlier about why this grade separation process is taking place, and the health and safety and perhaps potential business interruption issues associated with not doing it. But you're right, it would have to be very carefully constructed, and the reason it was in red there and not in green was because it would require the approval of the affected households, businesses, or property owners.
And also I would just point out that, again, remember Etty's original premise here, a lot of the reason why we're here is because of local traffic circulation. This isn't really a Caltrain project, right? This is about local street circulation, because as there's more trains run on this track, the current gates go down, all of you are waiting, whether you're on a bike or pedestrian or in a car. And so as there's more and more trains on the tracks, you're sitting there. So that's a local benefit that isn't necessarily a train benefit. So we could talk about more of that at the traffic section. Nyan is back in the back. I'm at a little commercial. Nyan and Ruta are here, and they can tell you all about the future delay that they are projecting. So yes, let's get 2 or 3 more folks, and then we're going to break to the, how about right there with his hand up? And then one on this side at the green shirt, who I recognize from some of the CAP meetings. Yes, go ahead, sir.
I have 2 quick questions.
Sure.
One, this is Blake Putney. First one is there any limit to how many trains Caltrain can run up and down that track? If we don't do this, are they unlimited? They can put them every 2 minutes or whatever if they could squeeze them. And the second question is, when you do your cost estimates, who are you planning on managing the project?
So your cost estimates, did you make any sort of assumptions? How did you develop them? I think that's a better way to answer that.
Thank you. So to answer your first question, Caltrain can, it's their right of way and they can run trains, and it'll be a question of their operational constraints, which we don't have control over. For the cost estimates, one of what we're looking at right now, we have, again, these are very preliminary, conceptual cost estimates, but there still is the question of, who will be doing the long-term maintenance, for instance, on the creeks, or whether it's the trench and you're doing the pumping plant and stuff like that. So we're trying to capture maintenance costs, but we have not identified who will actually perform those maintenance.
So the project management, whether it's run by the city or run by Caltrain or run by whomever, we don't know yet. Do you have a preference? I could write that down.
No. I want somebody that has a track record of...
Somebody with a track record.
That
okay.
actually... Yeah.
Okay. Great. No, and that's a really important comment. We're all kind of giggling, but I think we're watching the news. There's a lot of projects that haven't come in on time or on budget. Yes, with the Green, who I can't remember your name, but you're at all the meetings.
Hi, my name is Cedric.
Cedric, thank you.
I have a question about the tree exclusion with the ground anchors. Can you clarify, or do you know yet, how far back would trees be excluded, ideally as a function of the wall height? Given that the anchors are also as a function of the wall height. And is it all trees or only certain deep-rooted trees? So I think your visualizations should show those impacts as well, especially if you're showing views from people's backyards. Thank you.
Okay, do you want to clarify that on what your assumptions were about trees?
Well, at this point in time, so the ground anchors, as far back as the ground anchors go, would have restricted landscaping, so definitely not deep-rooted, but shallow roots. And again, you'd have to probably look at it as a case-by-case basis. What you want your planting palette would be. But the other thing is, as I mentioned in my presentation, is that we're still in the process of really trying to evaluate what those ground anchors are. Initial looking at the soils through here, we have very clay soils. So unfortunately, rock. If you've got rock, our ground anchors are much shorter. The soil conditions play into the length of those ground anchors, as does the loading and water table and other things. So we're in the process of kind of trying to, that's why I didn't put any dimensions up there, but as your soil conditions are not as good as rock, your anchors get much, much longer. And the other thing that I'd like to bring up is that in one of our, I believe it was our CAP meeting, and it's in the thing is that there's what we call there are beams that you could put at the top of the trench. Some people call them whalers, struts, beams, but we're also taking a look at is if you could put those beams on, how does that affect your ground anchors? But we just wanted to put this out there as we're looking at this, is that if we have to have ground anchors, you would have subsurface restrictions, you'd have surface restrictions because of your subsurface structure.
Okay, so we've got that person in the back with the plaid that's got it, and then Millette, I've got two people here, and then we're going to go to the stations.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm Robert. I have a question about the viaduct option. I understand the comparison to the viaduct that's in Berkeley for BART. I used to live over that way. But BART is a lot lighter than Caltrain or the heavy rail that we expect to still have on the corridor, and I was wondering if there's a good example of a heavy rail viaduct that we could look at as well.
So I've designed BART structures as well, and BART actually designs their superstructures or their structures to what we call Cooper E80 loading, which is the same railroad loading that you see for freight. So those BART structures could technically handle freight loading of Cooper E80. What was your second part of your question?
That was it.
Okay.
And whether there was an example. So you answered it. It is one and the same. All right, I have two more people, this gentleman, then our shark fan, and then we're going to let you loose at the stations because I really want you to have a lot of time with our people with name tags.
Okay, this is Larry. You just mentioned that the grid separation is only local traffic circulation issue. It doesn't benefit Caltrain, but
no, I didn't say it doesn't benefit Caltrain.
Right.
I said it also has some benefits for Caltrain, but it's primarily, in your case, really about local traffic circulation.
But actually, there are track watch in those cross section, and by doing this kind of grade separation, they can remove those track watches. So I think they save them the Caltrain, the cost, and also there are quite frequent train and car accident between this Charleston and Meadow, and by doing this kind of grade separation, it reduced their the
Yep,
frequent.
it definitely has
Yeah,
some Caltrain
so
benefits. It's
yeah.
just not only a Caltrain project, was the point I was making. Because they're perfectly happy to keep going with their gate down and keep you guys sitting in the traffic. That's why your city is the lead on this, not the Caltrain team. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Tom. On the trench option, you talked about when you get to the point of being underneath Meadow and Charleston, those have to be closed off for a while. How long is the closure? And you didn't mention that closure, I don't think, for the hybrid option or the viaduct. Could you comment?
You want
on
to re-summarize all that again? So the trench gets closed, local street gets closed approximately.
Just off the top of my head, it's probably on a month's, 3 to 6 months as you build, because you have to build the superstructure.
But one at a time.
One at a time, right. So you would be looking at Charleston versus Meadow. On the hybrid, we actually were talking, I think it's in the 3D animation, we're talking about nighttime closures to set girders. So you would have minimal closure. And again, we would also could look at those types of construction where we could accelerate construction, where you don't, because typically when we're doing superstructures on structures, it's waiting for the concrete to set. That takes time, doing the form work, but there are methodologies where we can shorten those windows up, and we could be looking at, but in the case of Meadow and Charleston and the trench, you basically you're cutting this, you're cutting something, and so it becomes more difficult to not to do that without a closure.
Again, we're not proposing, we're just giving it to you as an option. That's why we want you to go to the finance group and tell them you hate this idea. If you don't like this, go to Paul and have a conversation. We'll record it. Yeah, but you don't have the thing because we're going to adjourn to the stations. Remember I said the shark fan. Again, nobody's proposing the Melrose tonight, so we're not going to answer that question because it's unanswerable tonight. Okay? All right. We're adjourning to the stations. We have the matrix. We have a handout. We would like you to participate and give it to us up here. If you want to talk about drainage, right there. If you want to see the videos over, right here. If you want to talk about any of the engineering, over there. If you want to talk to city staff, up here near the front. Traffic, noise, and the finance guy are in the back right-hand corner. I'll reconvene us in about 35 minutes for report out.
No, I want the most, I want to. Do that, and how do I get a comment into the process?
Just leave it there and leave it with me. Just take people. All right, folks, I really do need you to sit down, and I need everyone who is responsible for reporting out from a station to come up here and be prepared to do that so we can adjourn on time this evening. So, Paul from noise, Nyan from traffic. We're done. Paul from finance, city staff. Jarrett, you're on for the city table. Okay, Dave Wemmer, we need the creeks. Millette, we're supposed to have another microphone. Yep, I remember that. Okay, can we, yeah, I do know that. All right, folks, so I've got 3 stations that relate to our options that were presented this evening. And Dave Wemmer, I believe you are responsible for reporting out for something. So come on down. And do we have another microphone for our, right behind me. Thank you. These guys are so good. All right, Dave, tell us what station you're reporting out for and what happened at it.
So I'm reporting for the Viaduct station, and I'll give you about 3 bullet items. One is, how high is this viaduct, and what's it really going to look like from my kitchen or my back patio. The other concern is can we get something nicer looking, something more architecturally pleasing for a structure than some of the early ideas that we have shown. And I had a third one.
So how high? So it's sort of a need for visuals from various vantage points. And then also, can we get something better looking?
And
I would imagine you might have heard about the excess land in between the...
Yeah, there was some concern about what could we do actually with the remaining unused right-of-way owned
So that
by
60-foot buffer.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also, we had some thoughts about we're looking forward to seeing the tunnel option covered at the next meeting.
Right. Yes, tunnel in January. Yeah. Okay, John.
Okay, I had the trench option, and one of the thoughts was between Charleston and Meadow, cover over the trench so you could have some sort of a parkway or land use in that area. Then there was also a reiteration of the idea of taking the idea of the viaduct and moving the trench over near Alma and having the existing tracks be the temporary tracks, and really taking a good hard look at that and see what design exceptions possibly could be used for that. And that was it.
Okay. So a desire to create another 60-foot buffer. All righty. And Peter.
All right, I was at the hybrid station, so that's where the railroad is taken up, not as high as the viaduct, but it's taken up and the roads get lowered slightly. A couple people asked why wasn't the reverse hybrid no longer considered. That's where the railroad was lowered and then the roads brought up a little bit higher. And then there was a lot of support for making better improvements for peds and bikes. This is a route for schools, Gunn, Hoover Elementary and Gunn High School. The kids are using this route at Charleston quite a bit. So even one comment I'd probably be easy to accommodate is to make the cross-section width a little bit wider at the undercrossing. Maybe have like a protected bike lane, things like that. Another woman made a comment about Alma Street needs improvements for bikes because that's very difficult to traverse. And then there was also concern about construction. There's going to be utility relocations and concerns about how the kids get through the construction zone. So.
Okay, safety concerns during construction. All right, let's hand it over and we'll deal with creeks.
Okay, so I was in the trench option for drainage creek issues, and my summary of bullet items include providing drainage systems to not flood adjacent property, recognize the high cost for the trench option, concerns about the pump station location. So we should evaluate that. And lastly, evaluate probability of environmental approvals so as not to waste time / money if approvals are not anticipated.
Wow, okay, thank you. All right, Millette, you were on Matrix. Sounds
Yes.
like a movie.
Evaluation matrix. Yes, I'm going to highlight 4 comments that we got. The first one was members of the public appreciated how we took the input from the CAP into consideration when we ranked the coloring of the visual impacts. There was also comments that wanting to see more differentiation in the rankings for the noise impacts. There were comments on the construction estimates, and they'd like to see more breakdown in the detail of what all the costs are included in those estimates. And then there was just a general concept of how a lot of the things that we identified in the pros and cons aren't really reflected in the criteria, and how do we capture that. And then I do just want to do a little footnote for the animation, since I was standing next to that. And we did get some appreciation for how much detail we've added to those animations. This is like our 3rd run, and they've gotten more detailed as we go. So we got some good feedback about that.
Great.
And I would encourage you, if you didn't get an evaluation matrix and you want to provide us specific feedback, please come get one. If you don't want to do it tonight, you can fill it out and email it to the city's email address that's on there.
Maybe we should move some of those more towards
I'll
the
move them to the
exit.
front.
Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, Jarrett, city stuff. And also known as the other table.
The other table. All right. So we got some questions about the status of the remaining options and the progression of decision making that led to where we are today. And as far as specific design options, there were questions about when a meeting like this will be held for the north end, the locations in the north end of the city, as well as the citywide tunnel. So if you missed our table, we do have a rollout over here in the corner, right over here, showing the current work to date of the citywide tunnel. But the January 23rd community meeting will be where this level of detail will be shared with everyone as far as the tunnel goes. Also had a few questions about the status of Churchill Avenue and what design options remain on the table for Churchill, as well as the relationship to Embarcadero Road if a closure is ultimately pursued at that location. And finally, similar questions around the design options for Palo Alto Avenue.
Okay, and Chantel, one more thing.
Yes, also at the other table, in terms of the tunnel, we really want to make sure that the cost would be talked about at the January meeting, and in comparison to any other recent tunnels such as San Francisco or BART to San Jose, and anything else that we can show about those actual dollar amounts for that.
Okay, great.
That's it for the others.
All righty, so we have one of our Pauls. This is our noise Paul.
Yes, we were talking about, I talked to a lot of people back there by the coffee about noise and vibration, several good comments. First, a lot of people like the chocolate croissants, and I think there's plenty left. So you should. A number of people wanted to express their opinion that both the hybrid and the viaduct options should include the short noise walls to cover the wheel rail, and I completely agree with that, and I believe that would be part of the future design on those. Some people asked about the difference between the electric locomotives versus the diesel. There are differences, but I think in most cases for the speeds we would be seeing here, that's a minor difference compared to some of the other issues. And especially the elimination of the horn soundings. That would be a big deal, real game changer. And somebody brought up a very good point. I didn't get his name, but he said in the hybrid option, where the train would be on a solid embankment, not on pillars, that looked like it had a hard vertical wall, would that increase reflections from the traffic on Alma and make it louder on the other side of the street? And that was a great point. And that was probably if they didn't do something about it, that could be an issue. So that should be considered in the future design of that option, that wall on the embankment for the hybrid should include some sort of acoustical absorption to prevent those reflections.
Okay, thank you. Other Paul? Now this is the finance Paul. Thank you.
Even before the meeting started, we heard very strongly that we've tended to underestimate or to downgrade the feasibility of local and regional sources of funding and financing for grade separation, and we should reconsider the way that we made that assessment, particularly vis-a-vis proposals like per employee headcount taxes, gross receipts taxes, and things of that nature. So that was one very strong comment. We also heard a number of questions about the costs and the relative costs of the different projects. How do we know what we're supposed to be paying for if we don't know how much these different projects are going to be? And so I was just clarifying with Etty the relative range of costs of the three different options, and I think it's trench is the most expensive, then viaduct, and then hybrid, right? And then those are we have preliminary costs in today's presentation, and my understanding is that going forward we'll have more detailed costing.
And additional costing.
And additional costing. We also heard a lot of interest in strategies around value capture. So when these projects are completed, there may be additional real estate development opportunities on some of the parcels that are made available that you could use to fund or finance the infrastructure. So some interest in that and figuring out what the logistics might be of a kind of public-private partnership or value capture strategy around those parcels. And then finally, and this is not strictly about funding or finance, there was a lot of interest in thinking about these grade separation projects in the context of broader regional and sub-regional transportation and circulation patterns and needs, and not just looking at sort of the city boundaries of Palo Alto, but also thinking more comprehensively about the whole Caltrain corridor and the sub-regional and regional transportation patterns.
Great. All right. Over to Ruta from the traffic station.
So traffic station had actually two tables. One was data collection and the other one was OD.
Can you hear her? No, I didn't think so. You're going to have to speak up like me. Good luck.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we had two tables. One was data collection table and the other one was OND.
Which means origin and destination.
Yes. So I'm going to explain one at a time. The data collection has all the intersections that we are going to collect the data and the tube counts. So they were asking if we are going to collect the data, which would include all modes. So yes, we are going to collect the data for vehicular, pedestrian, as well as bicyclist mode. So that is one. The other thing, there was a suggestion that we add 2 additional ADT locations, which are the tube counters that collect the data for 7 days a week. And that would be on Lincoln Avenue between Emerson and Elma. And one would be on Emerson between Lincoln and Embarcadero. So we would be adding those 2 locations. On OD table, people just wanted to get an idea of what have we done on origin destination, what does it mean? They wanted to kind of learn how is that analysis done, so that was explained. And I think that was it.
Okay, thank you. Well, we're at the end of our meeting. Really appreciate y'all staying. I'm sorry I kept you 2 minutes over, but thank you very much for being willing to participate tonight. We really want to see you back on January 23rd when we'll have the tunnel, we'll have the other 2, and we'll have bigger updates, and we'll bring Paul back on finance. So thank you again. And if people want to, have one last comment or fill out the matrix before you go, we'll be collecting those. But time now for our team to break it up. Yes. What? Oh, there's some city council people here. Oh, December 17th is a city council meeting. Etty, tell us what's going to happen, or Rob.
Yeah, thank you, for everybody for being here. But yeah, December 17th is an important date. That's the city council meeting. They'll be getting an update on grade separation. There may be an opportunity there for the council to further narrow the options or even look at an additional alternative. I know they're going to discuss it that evening. the idea of freight on the surface and rail below. So I know several people were interested in that. So yeah, December 17th, City Hall, Council Chambers in the evening.